as an unexplained phenomenon that lurks in the darkness of the night.
I think that they're different from us. We might share some of their DNA, but I don't think we're that related.
We live in a world where the unknown, mysterious phenomenon manifests itself.
Because there's a lot of stuff going on. And this is stuff that's being told to us by people who know about it, who are part of, the wildlife community.
Could they be explained?
The last time I'd been to the park alone, I thought I saw a very large dark shadow, at least in that.
Hello folks, my name is Chris Fringe, and tonight, join me as I discuss the unknown phenomenon that lurks in the world. From Dogmen to Sasquatch to the paranormal, let's dive into the unknown. You're listening to The Venomous Fringe. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of The Venomous Fringe. In tonight's episode, we're going to be talking to Texas cryptid and paranormal researcher Mark DeLeon. Mark DeLeon has been doing the research bound for quite a few decades now, and Mark himself has had a pretty interesting backstory, which we'll be talking to Mark very shortly. So that being said, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed tonight's episode. For all the returning Fringeaholics, welcome back. I'm so happy to have you all here. And if you're a first-time listener, welcome to the show. I hope you guys enjoy. With that being said, let's get started and dive into the Fringe. Tonight's guest is Mark DeLeon. Mark, welcome to the Venomous Fringe. How are you doing tonight, my friend?
Doing real good, man. Real good. Thank you for having me. Love your show. Been listening for a long time, and been pretty anxious about getting on and talking to you.
It's an honor to have individuals, especially researchers, out going about who are fascinated with the show and tune in, and I'm glad that the show is good and you enjoy it. Thank you for the compliment. Great to have you here. I'm very ecstatic. We have a lot to talk about, and hopefully you're keeping nice and cool over in the state of Texas.
Yeah, Texas and cool really isn't synonymous with each other, man. That's like, especially right now. I'll give you what it says on my front porch. It says 103. So I'm staying inside.
We had the great honor of being impacted by the heat and the typical Texas, Arizona temperatures over the past weekend. Over on the East Coast, we got impacted with over 103 or 110 degree weather. So I just had to throw it out there. I mean, we're still getting those 100 degree temperatures, but we're taking it like troopers. We, like I tell everybody else, it's like if the Texans, if the Arizonians can handle it, then I'm sure us over here on the East Coast can handle it as well.
Well, you see, I don't feel like it's hot until I can go outside, walk back in, and I feel like I just jumped in a pool. Just it's not hot so you can go to your car for 5 minutes and walk in sweating profusely. That's how us Texans think.
That's the beauty of it, though. Tonight we're talking some interesting content, from the Dogman to Wendigo to Skinwalkers and even paranormal. We got a lot on our plate tonight. But Mark, I'm gonna give you the $1 million question first. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. What got you into cryptozoology?
Well, actually, man, it's there's no simple answer to that, I'm sure, as there is with most people. It all started when I was younger. My abuela, and I'll refer to her as abuela, because if I say grandma, I'll go in different directions. But my abuela, she was a curandera of sorts, and I know we discussed that, what that is. It's kind of a medicine woman in Native American and Hispanic culture. And when I was little, I never got told, oh, Bigfoot's out there or Dogman's out there or anything like that. But she would give me very general warnings, hey, don't knock at night. And these were times where I did something, it wasn't just generally telling me that at night. If I was playing with something and a knock happened, no. And it was quick. It was no, we don't knock at night. You don't knock at night. And, another one was you don't whistle at night. That was a huge one for her. You never whistle. If we were inside, if we're outside, you don't whistle at night. And, after a few times, getting in trouble with that, she finally told me why. And it was because you'll call the devil. She never elaborated on it heavily or what was going on, but she would say you would call the devil when you do those things at night. And I mean, you tell a little kid that, and they start thinking all sorts of things, I mean, we lived next to a creek, a very big creek with a big dip next to that area. And my uncle lived across the street from my grandma. So if I ever went across the street at night, whether it was 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, you bet you see this 10, 11-year-old sprinting across the street just because I was like, Grandma said it's dangerous out here. So that's kind of what got me in that area. And then when she would tell me those things, I mean, just having a curious brain, I go to the library, find these books on all these, American monsters, from Loch Ness to Bigfoot to Goatman to Mothman. And I don't, as a kid, I remember thinking like, not that they were real, but just maybe there's one or two of those types of things out there, and I really don't have to worry that bad about it, but I don't know, man. That's pretty much what started me in that area. It's more of a family thing. Oh, and my uncle, my Theo, he's the one who's got the best stories in the family. I got about one or two of them from him, but there's some that he won't say because he gets very scared, or just there's certain things that he doesn't want to touch on. But he's the one who, if I see something or I hear something, or I'm on my travels seeing patients, and if something pops up, that's the guy I call. Like, that's the guy, hey, I saw this, what do you think? Or what do you think about that? Or what should I do sometimes if I see this? So that's kind of what got me started in cryptozoology. I have a degree. I have a master's degree and a bachelor's degree in communication science and disorders. I have a minor in psych, so I understand the importance of validity and reliability when doing research. Those are very important things. I'm not trying to knock anybody else's research, anything like that. And I'm not a boots on the ground type of researcher. Honestly, I collect stories from people. I've had a few experiences myself that I can relate to, and I just have a history in my background from my abuela and some of my relatives you hear those stories as a kid, and then they kind of, stay in the back of your mind. And then podcasts come around, and you hear the same stories from different parts of the world, or different parts of Texas or somewhere else. And you're like, I know they didn't talk to my Theo or my grandma, and you're like, this stuff could be valid and reliable. And it just starts getting you going in different directions, man.
I think when we talk about Latino, Hispanic cultures, legends such as Azalea or La Llorona or Los Mala, all these classic mythos, it's a very frightening case because it's almost with the Native American creatures too, because you have these topics that are just very scary to talk about, and the mythology behind them, the mentioning of them, what can happen to you, the curse even. So I think when it comes to an origin like that is also pretty basic, and it's very frightening in many outskirts, because, and if you're not one of them, ethnicity wise, then you won't really get a better understanding. But I think each ethnicity has a culture of folklore that is, of course, deemed frightening.
Yeah, definitely. And she also, the one thing she would never discuss with me, because I remember you remember that old show from the 80s? Remember, or no, you're a little younger than me. Sorry about that, bro. Wolf. Do you remember a show called Wolf? It was
Yeah, Wolf.
USA. Yeah. The guy had a pentagram on his hand. Remember, it would bleed, and he'd turn into a werewolf. That was one of my favorite shows as a kid. Well, I was watching it with my grandma one time, and she told me to turn it off. She was like, she told me in a Spanish way to turn it off, and she was very angry when she told me to turn it off. And I was like, what the, what, it's just a TV show. And she goes, no, you don't look at those things. You don't say those things even out loud. And I was like, what, werewolf? And she wasn't worried about that word. She was worried about skinwalker. And when she didn't even tell me that word, I didn't know what she was talking about until I got older. She just said, you don't mess with those things. You don't say the name. And I think that she maybe thought she told me before what the name was or something. She didn't even want to say it again. You get what I'm saying? And she told me, she said, there's certain places you'll be. There's certain places you'll go. You never know where it is, but they might hear you there. And I never knew what that meant. And I don't think that, now that I think back on it, I don't think she meant from a physical standpoint, like you're at the corner store and there's a skinwalker down the road and they might hear you say the word skinwalker. I don't think it's like that. I think it's more from a paranormal or spiritual end. If the veil's a little thinner between ours and their area and something hears you, they might try to take a physical form and come meet you or visit you,
I see what you're saying, and to elaborate, basically, maybe if you say in the name of spirit or the creature, whether you're in a certain area or whether you're in the woods or whether you're by yourself or you're somewhere where you shouldn't be, somewhere that's sacred, like preferably a burial ground. That's a great way to summon that type of monster, demon, whatever you wish to call it.
Yeah, and she would, it's now my uncle would tell me these things. Like he didn't elaborate into depth, but my uncle would tell me stuff like, if he'd have little sayings like because I used to meditate a lot. I used to, when I was in college, I played college, sports, and you got to get yourself under control sometimes. So you got to learn how to calm yourself down. I played basketball, so if you're at the free throw line and you got a scholarship, depending on how well you perform, it can get kind of nerve wracking. So I started, learning diaphragmatic breathing, meditation, stuff like that. I went to like 5 years when I was in college, every Friday to learn how to do these things properly, just so I could get myself under control, And he would tell me sometimes, don't do those things too much, or don't go too far with that stuff, because same thing, they will look back, or somebody would look back, so I don't know, man. Some of that stuff can get very interesting. That goes into different areas, I mean, when you talk about Dogman or Bigfoot or anything cryptid based, I really don't think it's as simple as it's an upright walking canid or a big ape out there just running around. Maybe a few, maybe some like that, but I think it goes a little further. Honestly, I don't even know what that means, to be honest with you.
That is very true. I don't think a lot of people do, especially with the term behind it, especially. I wanted to ask you, though, where you live, wise, there's a lot of mythology, a lot of those mythos over in Texas. What would be probably one of the more frightening aspects of it? The idea of the living dogmen that reside there, or the supernatural presence of the demons and the monsters that reside there?
Honestly, for me, and I'll just give you my standpoint, and I think this is pretty echoed with some people, the supernatural aspect of it is the more frightening aspect for most people. I mean, I've went around and collected stories from different people, and I mean, you got people who talk about seeing this large black thing that ran across the road, right? Or this thing that was like the size of a cow ran across the road, and I think it was a cat or something like that, and they're not freaked out. They're more like, oh, can you believe that? Like, wow. But if something else happens, if there's something supernatural or some supernatural aspect of it, they don't even want to talk to you about it. They don't want to say it. They don't want to mention it. They're like, nope. So down here we have more of a fear of that. Like you mentioned La Llorona a little while ago, the lady in the white dress, who drowned her kids at the creek type stuff. That's a huge scare your kids story around here. Okay. You don't want to get your kids inside at night. That's the story you tell them. So nobody's saying Bigfoot's going to come and get you, really, unless you're my grandma, and you got a little bit of a Native American aspect to it, And my Wella was very defiant with certain things, though, man. Like she put it this way: when they got her to not speak Spanish when she was a kid, because down here in South Texas it was frowned upon to speak Spanish for various reasons or whatever, for assimilation. She would defiantly say no, and she would tell me, "One day somebody's going to pay you more for speaking Spanish." So that was my abuela, man. She was right. Hey, the work that I do, I get referrals just because I'm Spanish speaking. Yo puede.
You mentioned that you had some encounters of your own. Can you go into a little bit of detail on what you had encountered, if you can?
Yeah, man, definitely. And the one that kind of got me started in this, as far as like not started, but just something that piqued my curiosity was. And it starts to get me a little freaked out every once in a while. So you pardon me if my memory goes a little bit. It was late at night. I always take walks with my dog, man. My dog, Dogman, right? My dog is next to my wife, my best friend. I got an 85-pound pit bull that is the nicest dog in the world, unless you're trying to hurt his family. We were walking at night. We got to the edge of where my street is. It goes into a bigger field. Okay. And about 100 to 150 yards into that field, there's a water treatment plant way out there, because we're far enough from the city. We live in a very rural area. My subdivision is it's surrounded by about 4 different corn to wheat fields. Okay. So I live in a very wooded area in certain places. Now this treatment plant was about 150 yards out there. I walk my dog out there. I always carry a flashlight with me. Pretty strong flashlight, has a strobe to it, a lot of different stuff, just in case. We got coyotes out here all the time. And I saw something out there, man, because I was just shining my light. My dog perked up out there, and he's like looking out there. And usually I can get him to come with me. I can get him to move. Hey, come on, Kobe, let's go this way. Hey, come on. He listens to me all the time. Well, he had his back ridged. He wasn't growling, but he was looking in that direction like, Dad, there's something there. And I shine my light, and I get it a little bigger in that direction, and I kind of zero in a little bit more, and I think what I see two little dots, right? And my mind goes, oh, that's the keypad, because there's a keypad to get into the treatment plant there. I'm like, that's the keypad. Okay, that's the keypad. It's the keypad. Because it's high enough, maybe about 4 feet off the ground, somewhere right there. And then the keypad moves. It ducks down a little bit. And I was like, okay, that's not the keypad. My dog comes around me. He has a harness on, and he pulls me this direction and, like, walks me back to the house. And he's like intently walking and starts galloping a little bit. He doesn't do that. I'm boss. I tell him where to go. He's well trained. And then we get far enough away from there, and he stops his gallop, and he's like good again. That was my first experience into something. Now I can't tell you what that was. I didn't have any smell. Hey, the first thing I looked into was cougar. I was like, man, if there's a cougar out here, I want to know about that. That was a pretty big head. The distance for the eyes, that was big. And then I'm like, no, that was too big for a cougar. It didn't stand up. There was no upright aspect of this, but it was just, I was like, that had to be the biggest cougar in recorded, history in South Texas. And they don't think we have any down here, to be honest with you, certain things. So that's what led me into Dogman, kind of research. Because first I looked into Bigfoot in this area, right? Because I was like, that's how my mind goes. That's where my mind goes, just based on my history with my grandma, with everything like that. There's other things, right? And I was like, what does she dabble? I don't know. Okay. So I started looking into it. I found Vic's show. I found Vic's show, as most people that look into Dogman are going to find. And I don't know what that was, man. I really don't. I don't have an explanation for what that was, but it led me on my search a little bit. I'll put it this way. When I started doing home health, because I do home health. I'm a home health speech pathologist. I do therapy at home, and I go everywhere. The place that I service goes between 200 to 300 miles, and it's wooded areas between all those. This isn't like city, And when I go out to these places, you just get different stories, different stuff, and it just started, yeah, man. First questions I was asking was, have you seen any cougars out here? I'm still going with this cougar thing, and then, it turns into, hey, have you guys seen anything strange out here? Any kind of interesting wildlife or anything like that? And most of these people you'll find that are out there, and that, I'm a therapist, so they're going to see me maybe for about 2 or 3 weeks and never see me again. It seems like they're more comfortable telling me some things sometimes. And some things that I would hear, if I didn't hear it from somewhere else on another podcast or something like that, I'd go, okay, that was really, really strange. And I don't have anything corroborated until I hear something else, so. But that's my story with that. I do have 2 other stories here, just happened to me, that pertain to me. One's a little more supernatural, and one's a little bit more of a UFO side. Do you want me to go on those before I go with the other stories from the other people?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, this is right down the alley of that story, actually. Another night, I'm with my dog. That's the other thing. I don't scare very easily. You could call it crazy. You could call it ignorant, dumb, whatever you want. I get very curious with stuff. So I didn't stop my walks. I'm still doing my walks. I started carrying around don't ask me why, but I started carrying around a knife with me, like that's going to do anything, right? But made me feel more secure. So I'm walking around. It's like midnight on a Saturday. I specifically remember because I was walking in my neighborhood. Now, like I told you, I got fields all around my neighborhood. I'm walking in my neighborhood. I'm coming to the edge of the west side of my neighborhood, and in that area is a whole huge field and then a chemical plant way down there. And I look up and I see what I think is a spotlight at first. I'm like, okay, I'm walking with my dog, and I'm like, my brain goes in different directions, remember that. So I'm like thinking, wouldn't it be strange? I'm already telling myself this. When I walk over there, I'm going to go look in the field. I want to see where that's coming from. But wouldn't it be crazy if I looked and there's no source in the field for that spotlight? Right. And I don't even see anything coming from the ground. It's not even a spotlight. It's a light in the sky. I'm just, thinking spotlight because of my brain. I get to the field, and yeah, there's no source from the ground. And this light is like above clouds. I got to specify that. It's not just in, the blackness. It's above some clouds. And the thing that came to my mind was, when you go to a carnival, and there's a specific ride. I forgot what it's called, but it looks like one of those fidget spinners that the kids were using. And it's like on a triangle mount. And like it'll go one area faster, then come to the other area, slow down, and go back to the other area a little faster. That's the movements it was doing, like kind of like a triangle movement with a light constantly going through that triangle. Now if that's not strange enough, it was following the clouds, like it was going with the clouds, and it wasn't lightning. There was no rain in the area. There were no other clouds. It was that cloud right there doing it. And my dog, he wasn't freaked out. He wasn't, nothing like that, nothing from him. I was like, I watched it for like 10 minutes. Now everybody's probably thinking, well, did you record it? I tried. I did on my phone. I tried, but you could barely see like a light. And to me, it was like, it doesn't really look like much, so I was like, I'm going to get my wife. I got to go wake her up. So I woke her up. I brought her outside on the porch and I said, do you see that? And she's like, yeah, I see it continuously. What is that? I don't know. It would go faster, it would go slower, but it would go in the same pattern above this cloud. And I was like, I don't know, and we got to the point where we just stopped watching it. It didn't go away. It was just there. And it's moving a little bit and coming back to the area, but it was hovering over those chemical plants, and I'm just like, okay, I'm going inside. Fast forward about a month later, we're driving down this road that's right by my house that comes into the subdivision, and I see the same thing in the same spot way over there. I mean, it freaks my wife up to the point where she's like, stop looking. Just stop looking. Like, that's enough. Just stop looking. So that's my UFO story. And then I started seeing different things at that time, man, in the sky. Like one day, I looked towards the sun. I had some polarized glasses on, and I see this little white dot, like over to the left, but it's moving slowly, And I'm like, that's not a plane. There's no track behind that. I don't know, man. I'm done looking up. That's my UFO story from that end. I don't know what that was. I don't know what was going on. I haven't seen anything in this area at that, again. And it's just, that was unexplainable to me,
Those are pretty interesting reports, especially with seeing the mysterious giant creature that you saw that one night with your dog, and then of course the UFO report. I find when UFO reports are in Texas, though, I want to touch base on that real quick, when UFOs and all that in the state of Texas, I mean, how very frightening is that to be as close to a place that's so convenient like Roswell or somewhere where there's a lot of government interference in that specific region like Texas with UFOs or unidentified flying objects in the sky?
Well, and where I live, man, I live next to an airport. I got an airport over there, so people are like, well, maybe it was a plane, Mark. Well, I've seen planes fly over my house all the time. There were no planes in the sky that night. And we have 2 Navy bases down here. Like, we have a Navy base down here in Corpus where they train pilots. We have another Navy base in Kingsville. So was it alien? I don't know. Was it us? Could have been us. Who knows? But I know that was very odd. When I was a kid, one of the things that I was very interested in as well, not just cryptozoology, was being a pilot. I have a part of my family that's in the military, and I was so intrigued by aircraft. And I know there's no look, there's no aircraft they told us about that could do that, but what they haven't told us, we don't know. And the other thing that's interesting about that is the side where it's on, the side, the west side, that is the area where the majority of my stories come from too. That's kind of weird.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. Wow. That's something fascinating, and I would love to know more about. But I wanted to also throw it out there, too, because when we look at places in Texas and the whole idea of Black Hawk military copters and a lot of stuff going on over there, and I've spoken to a lot of Texans who've mentioned a lot of it, do you feel that there's a bigger cover-up going on over there when it comes to UFO conspiracy than there is of that of when it comes to cryptid over there in Texas?
I do, but the thing about it is, here where I live. Now, I have a conspiracy mind, and I always hear what Vic says. He has, what's that phrase where he says, if you hear hooves, think horse, not zebra, right?
Correct.
So I think that sometimes myself, because you got to remember, look, I'm 2 hours south of San Antonio. I'm 3 hours north of the Mexican border. Some of the places where I go, there are illegal immigrant activity, okay? I'm very well aware of that. But, I can give you a story myself involving a helicopter. For me, I was doing an evaluation. I was going down to Falfurrias, which is about an hour away from where I am. And that's about another hour away from the Mexican border. That's a high level of illegal immigrant activity there, right? Well, I was doing an evaluation. I got lost on a country road. I really didn't know I knew where I was going, but I knew the general area, but not. Once you get out there, man, your GPS is not going to work. Okay, those are areas where GPS doesn't work, or maybe it doesn't work for another reason. Now that I'm thinking about it, who the hell knows? But I got kind of lost out there, and a military helicopter found me. Like, this wasn't ICE. This wasn't the Border Patrol, because they have their own insignias. This was a black helicopter with a gun turned on one side and a camera on the other side. Okay? And, like, I felt like, okay, he came out of nowhere, kind of. He probably thinks I'm a smuggler of some sort or something, man. Like, you know what? He probably thinks I'm lost out here. I'm going different directions, and I'm smuggling illegal immigrants or something, right? So I put my medical badge up to the window, to the windshield. I opened the doors to the car. I'm in a little coupe, too. I opened the trunk just to show there's nothing there, you know what I mean? And he's still there. And when a gun turret is kind of pointed at you in that direction, you start to freak out a little bit. So I was like, all right, I just started driving in general areas back to the area where I thought I was going. My GPS came back on, and he's behind me the whole time, kind of escorting me out, to be honest with you. Okay, all right, no problem. Hey, I'll get on the highway. Once I get on the highway, he's off, and I never saw him again. So, that could have been some sort of, they were looking for illegal immigrants or whatever, but I've been through those areas before and gotten lost, and that never happened. So I think that the government down here, considering we have a military base, all that stuff, I think they have to be cognizant of what's in the air. And I think they're very cognizant of it because they, have radar. They know what's going on. But at the same time, I have friends in the Border Patrol, and they didn't give me detail to stories. I know a guy that actually was he was the head of the Border Patrol in an area down here, and he told me there's files and folders regarding cryptids in this area. Like, he didn't tell me what. He didn't go in depth into all that, but he was like, there's things we've seen on FLIR that we can't explain, and that's about where I'll leave it.
That's interesting how the people over at the Border Patrol, and I kind of expected that, but I didn't expect too much of that to be even declassified to a sense of being exposed to the public, or at least to people, that, oh yeah, we do have cryptid reports, but we can't go into detail.
No, this guy I went to school with him. Put it this way, I knew this guy so well that when they came to ask about the Border Patrol and stuff like that, when they do investigation, when you're going to go to the Border Patrol, they do a pretty heavy investigation. It's not like you're going to go to the police. They came and asked me about him. Put it that way. That's how well I knew the guy, and just different things that I would say. And I told him about the helicopter. Like, I told him about that, and I told him I was scared about that, and should I be worried about that? And he just let me know, and he didn't say cryptids and so much, but he just said there's other things out there they've seen on FLIR, and they have to be aware of, kind of thing. So that's kind of where I left it. I don't poke around with stuff like that. If somebody says something like that and gives you a tidbit of information, they'll deny it amongst anybody else, and I would never even give his name, but yeah, sometimes people just want to say things too sometimes,
Right. No, I understand that. And what I was getting at was the fact that I'm very surprised that the Border Patrol, especially for what they do profession-wise, that they would even have dossiers on cryptid and paranormal, or at least UFO reports, because that's just, to me, something that, I wouldn't think would go that rate, but then again, of course, where it's at, I would assume. But not to distract, can you tell us some of the reports that you have collected over the years, cryptid-wise, and of course, if you have UFO-wise?
Yeah, definitely. I'll give you, they go pretty in depth. Not in depth, but I was looking at some of the messages we've been talking about, because I had to kind of refresh my memory on some of the things. But there's one that really just messes with me, and I never even told you about this one. This one I got this story maybe it was last summer. It was last summer, actually. Here in this area, I'm just going to give you the topography, kind of the way the land is. We have a lot of beaches here in Corpus. We do saltwater beaches, but that follows a waterway, kind of like a river, out into an area called Corpus Christi Lake, and that's more inland. It's a big lake by Mathis, a little town called Mathis, and a lot of my stories come from that area, man. To be honest with you, Lake City. Okay, the craziest story I have, I'm kind of going to give it to you right now because I gotta say it. I went to do an evaluation out there. Part of my job, being a speech pathologist, is I deal with cognition, swallowing, speech and language, anything that a stroke will impact. I deal with. I deal with Alzheimer's patients, Parkinson's patients, dementia, all that. So I go out there, and I'm doing an evaluation with the patient, and the man is a military man who's there with the patient. It's her son. And I do the evaluation. I get good rapport with the family, all that stuff. They didn't give me anything then, but when I came back, real interesting with that too is, let me tell you, the gate to the property was about 40 yards away from the house, and they would always walk me to the house and back to the gate. Always. Like, I thought at first, like when they told me to wait at the gate, we'll be right there, I thought at first it was because of the dogs. I'm like, okay, they got dogs. Well, it's a little Chihuahua and another beagle. I don't think they're too worried about those, getting people. But they would always walk me back and forth. So I went to the house, and I'm like, hey, I have general ways of asking things sometimes. That's an area where I've got different stories. So I wanted to go for it. I was like, you guys get any interesting stories out here, any interesting wildlife? I always put it that way, because you don't want, hey, you ever seen Bigfoot? That's a real good way to get people not to tell you something, and the man tells me, the woman tells me, she's like, she's telling the man, she goes, tell him. I'm like, do you have a story, sir, or something? She goes, tell him. You'll probably never see him again anyway. Just tell him. All right. I said, did you see something? He goes, it's kind of a two-part to it, because the woman first tells me that when they were living out there, when they first started living out there, they were building their house. So they brought a mobile home out there. Okay, and they were staying out there, and she would stay out there by herself all the time because the husband worked in the oil field, which is very common down here. He was ex-military as well. So one night when he was away from the house, she heard, and this is, I never said anything about it. She heard a howl that was very human-like. Like it sounded like a man, kind of like a man, but kind of like a howl at the same time. And she said she got very scared by that. And she would hear different stuff outside, like footfalls, different things like that. So the man came back. When he came back, she stayed inside the trailer, and she told him about it. So I think they heard it another night. It was a little more faint, and it was a little further off. So the man goes outside. He has a weapon, ex-military. He has a flashlight, and he looks into one of the fields that's close to him. And Chris, what he told me, I was like, taken back by it. He says, I see some deer. He says, and they're not normal deer, though. He goes, I see them, and at first it doesn't register with my brain that they're too high off the ground. And then I look, and he said, this is about 8 to 10, maybe 11 deer, and they're upright, and they're walking through a field. And this is maybe like, I don't know, 45, 75 yards away from him, so past his gate that he now has. And he told me, and the look on his face, Chris, you can tell if somebody's going to BS you. They don't have any reason to begin with, right? But if somebody's going to BS you, you can kind of see certain things. And if somebody has seen something, you can see it in their face. And this man was very matter of fact, mean what he says what he means type of guy. And he told me, I don't have any explanation for it, son. And they were even pumping their arms a little bit. It looked like they were pumping their arms as they were walking, and then they got into a run a little bit, and then they were gone. And that right there, to me, Chris, that for me was like, wow. Okay, he didn't say anything about the legs. They were kind of a distance, and the field had something covering the bottom portion. You could only see every once in a while, but he didn't see if they had feet or hooves or whatever. But and very well off people, very nice house out there, and you're going, okay, that's an interesting story. So I don't know what that was. Now, the part that really got me telling you that one, because I probably would have just put that somewhere on, not even thought about it, was the fact that I heard it on somebody else's podcast. I won't talk about who it is, stuff like that, but I heard an upright walking deer story in Texas. And the thing that caught my attention was the guy explains it with a pumping motion when they were running, like the deer had a pumping motion with their arms. So that's too that's too similar for me to be a coincidence, And when you're doing research or anything like that, I don't consider myself quote unquote a researcher, but I have been published before with a paper when I was in college regarding my profession, stuttering, things of that nature. So I know how to do research. I know there's a certain way to do it. I'm not knocking anybody else on how they do what they do, but there's valid and reliable data. And when something's repeated, think of it like a dartboard. How many times you hit the dartboard when you throw the dart is reliability. You can hit the dartboard. Good job. Now, how valid that reliability is how many times you can get to the bullseye. Now, when I hear a story from one person, and this is why, I'm sure how you do it and how everybody does it, you hear another story from somebody else, and they're little tidbits that they couldn't have made up, and they wouldn't have known this person said. You go, okay, what is that? So that's that story right there.
That's a interesting case, and those are pretty cool cases as one. What I find about when it comes to the Skinwalker region, or at least something when it comes to the idea of a shapeshifter, do you have a viewpoint on these creatures being one of the same thing? It just has one name rather than a few different names, or do you feel that these are separate creatures on their own, so to speak?
Well, Chris, the thing about that is, man, like we accept. In order for me to talk to you right now on this podcast, we're accepting that there's such thing as Dogman, right? And these cryptids. We're already accepting that. Now, let's say you and I were in a cabin, right? We're hunting, you and I. And one of these things starts terrorizing us. We're going to think, there's a terrifying monster or an animal out there, right? And let's say you turn to me and you're like, Mark, what if it's a werewolf? Well, I can't poo-poo that away. I can't say, come on, Chris, seriously? Come on, man, seriously. There's an upright walking canid outside. It can't be a werewolf. You can't say that. So when you ask that question, it's like, there's just this possibility of something being a person who changes into something else, as there is an upright walking canid that was originated from, let's say, the cynocephali or, Egyptian lore or Aztec lore or something like that. That might fit your paradigm a little bit better when you try to give the explanation, right? Well, no, I believe in Dogman because it fits my paradigm as an animal. Yeah, well, what if they're not all like that?
That's very true as well, and I'm glad that somebody has a good way of putting it like that, because I know that in the field of Dogman that many have classified it as a werewolf or a man-wolf, but the way you just put it is probably the best way I'd probably put it as well, in terms of what we're out there for, what it is, what it could be, as long as it's in the same lore nonetheless.
Yeah. It's like, if we're sitting there, and we start thinking about something, let's say you pull your rifle out and you shoot it, and it smiles back at you, or it doesn't go down like the majority of these things do. That's a little more evidence towards my mythology of silver bullets, if I'm a believer in that. I'm like, okay, I told you, Chris, get inside. We got to find a silver bullet. That's a werewolf. You know what I mean? So, it's just different, man.
I 100% agree. One thing I wanted to ask you, though, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the Dogman lore here, is, in your personal belief, what do you believe a Dogman is?
This has taken me down so many different rabbit holes. Now I'm going to give you my personal, like what I like in cryptid research is the origin. Whenever I'm watching a werewolf movie or something like that, I'm always, the thing that interests me the most and the thing that'll make it a good movie for me if it's an interesting origin story. So that's always where my thought process has been going. I've always, okay, so where does this come from? I looked at the cynocephali. We've all seen those things, and we've all heard, they Greek mythology behind it, how they, appease them with, shields, swords, even sacrifices sometimes. And that's documented. And then you go to the Aztec side of things, and they have a deity. I think I even sent you some messages about that before. Xolotl, I think is how you say his name. I'm not even quite sure, and I don't want to try it too many times. But for all of these cultures to have similar things in their histories, you can't just say, well, it just popped up now, or, it's from another dimension or something like that. Or maybe you can, I don't know what Dogman is, but I do know that there is something there. Now I think that there could be different variations, different types of this. Who knows? J.C. Johnson said something very interesting on our podcast a long time ago, and I think Josh touched on it on his Paranormal Roundtable. He said, and this is, I respect J.C. Johnson's opinion, and for what he said was, he gave an analogy of like, an individual who's a skinwalker, or somebody who kind of got that ability, and they stay stuck that way. They come to a person who owns the property, and they're like, hey, you mind if I just stick around, eat the wildlife, keep people off your property, that type of stuff. And you hear that, and then you're just taken back. You're like, okay, huh? and I mean, you go into JC's research, and it's pretty well documented that he's knew what he was doing there. So for somebody like that to say that, you're like, oh, so that's a possibility, you know. So that's kind of where I go with that, man. And I can get off on a tangent sometimes, Chris. I'm sorry.
No, you're perfectly fine, because I myself, I'm still trying to figure out what these things are, and it's quite ironic because I sit here and I do a podcast talking about them, but I think when the big dividend is that we're in a big world, and we're just we're people in a little pond in such a huge world. I may have just butchered the expression, but the point is that when it comes to the terminology of Dogman, when it comes to what we're looking at, what we're trying to get a good idea on, sighting wise, one of the toughest things that I've always learned is that there's always going to be some sort of chemical balance of people who will always try to describe them as certain things, but really aren't that. And then also you'll have people go ahead and try to talk about them being something totally different, and they still try to inhabit that type of belief to people. But really, I think the best answer would be, to me at least, is I don't know what they are, but all I know is that they are some sort of canine-looking animal that we can't explain. But it is a very interesting type way, the way you see it both ways. One thing I wanted to ask you, and it kind of ties into when we talk about a little bit on the Skinwalker portion. Have you spoken with Native Americans in terms of encounters, or have you spoken to someone with Native American background?
Well, my abuela, considering my whole family has a Native American background, man. My abuela, if you saw a picture of her, she's traditional, and she's from the Apache tribe, and she's traditional Apache look, high cheekbones, I mean, she could come out in the movie, man. Beyond her, I'll be honest with you, I don't really discuss it with very many people, much less Native Americans, because I don't have a question about it, Chris. I firmly believe those are things that, honestly, I like the blood, the physical nature of this, and that's the part that intrigues me and I look into a little bit more. Once it starts going to the supernatural side of it and stuff like that, I'll be honest with you, Chris, I have a very healthy respect for that, not a fear. And I get what I got from my relatives, and I really don't bother other people with it. I probably could, but when you start asking questions like that, you got to remember this stuff is not to us. It's a subject that we talk about on podcasts, that we talk about, very flippantly with certain things, and it intrigues us. To them, it's like the devil. It's something you don't really discuss and talk about. Like if you're going to talk about the devil with a Catholic or somebody who's devout Christian faith, they really don't want to talk about it that much, but they do acknowledge it.
I agree with that, because I've had that happen to me multiple times. I've also spoken to people, Linda Godfrey being one, who's made mention that when it came to the Native American Commission over in Wisconsin, when she was trying to talk to some of the people in that profession in reference to Dogman and whatnot. But another thing I wanted to ask you is, we hear some cases and reports of these creatures wearing clothing, but many people assume that this is a werewolf or maybe a skinwalker. Would you consider a Dogman capable of wearing any type of fabric, or would you see that as a werewolf or a skinwalker, Wendigo type creature, so to speak?
I can say this. I'll put it this way. The reports that we have of these things, I mean, they go as detailed. Vic's got a few where they're screwing light bulbs. They're loosening the light bulbs, not even taking them off, so they're not seen on the porch. They're jiggling doorknobs. They're smiling at you. They're doing very strategic things. There's a higher level of intelligence there. So you can't just say, well, I mean, of course, that wouldn't put some clothing on and try to, pass itself off as something else or try to disguise itself. I mean, it couldn't do that, could it? Well, yeah, possibly. I mean, a possum will play dead, right? And that's just learned behavior. So could it be? That's what I said. That's why I say, Chris, I'm very open-minded with things. I'm not saying I'm gullible. I'm not going to say I believe everything, but I'll hear everything. And is it a possibility? Yeah, man. That's about the biggest I can give you with that, And do I remember Vic having a show. So we always go back to, referencing Vic. But he had one there, and they discussed it before, where that individual it was a man, and he was talking about his uncles, and how they dealt with Dogman, and how they believed that there were werewolves, and and that they leave their clothing, after they change and come back for it. So for me, if somebody came up to me and said, that aspect of speech pathology is wrong, you don't know what you're talking about there, I'd be like, really? So for me to say those guys were wrong, that wasn't a werewolf they were talking about, I really can't do that. Everybody's got different stories. Everybody got things going on. 10 years ago, if you told me that I would believe in upright walking canids to the point to where I would adjust some of my behaviors in the woods, or just adjust behaviors in general, yeah, right. So there's that.
I think in terms of when people see these things, there's definitely a million thoughts that transpires through their minds. What would you consider to be, when you go out and do your research, what are the things that you look out for? Like, what do you prepare yourself with? Do you bring yourself weaponry? Do you bring yourself, some sort of equipment or whatever? What is it that you do to prepare yourself to go out when you research these things?
Well, you see, for me, I'm not a boots on the ground type of guy. I've thought about it, but I'll be honest with you, with some of those things, look, man, when I had that experience about 6-7 years ago, shortly after that, I had my first child. I got a 5-year-old daughter. And my research is armchair research. I'll be completely honest with you. I get stories from people. I think they're very interesting. I correlate them with other things I've heard. But as far as me going out there, I don't have a lot that I don't really go out there because I care about coming back. I'll put it that way. And I don't mean that. Hey, I don't mean that as like people are going out there. Hey, you got to watch out. But we all hear the David Paulides stories. We all look at those things. And what you're asking me, how would I prep if I was going and researching these things? I know what I would do. I would take a weapon with me. I'm sorry. I know people feel Bigfoot or Dogman aren't going to come around you. If they see you have a weapon, they can smell the gunpowder, whatever. Yeah. But there are cougars, okay? There are coyotes. There are other things you need to worry about, all right? So if you are going to go out there, especially in this area, in South Texas, I can tell you right now, I've been stalked by 2 coyotes before through my neighborhood. Just through the cornfields, I saw them. And if I didn't have my dog with me, who knows, So that's the best thing I can say. If you go out there, hey, people feel more comfortable in the woods than I do a lot of the time, but I'm always my motto is hope for the best, prepare for the worst. That's the way I've always been.
That's a good way to put it, and I agree with that 100%. I find it when people go out there, and I mean, armchair research, nothing wrong with it. Personally, I've done that myself, and I think everybody has their intake, because at the end of the day, we're all out there looking for the same thing, so it's not a big thing. If one is an armchair researcher, that's fine. One's an on-field researcher, that's fine. If anything, we're all still collecting the same data. And at the end of the day, too, one of the things I like to always put out is the fact that when it comes to research, when it comes to the dividend of what we're here and studying, what would be the most important thing to put out there in the terms of what you research? What is it that you want to deliver to those who you want to give the information to? What do you want as a mark for your research in the future? Do you want people to remember you for this? Do you want people to see you as that source to say, okay, this guy in Texas, he's that guy we want to go to when it comes to encounters? Where do you want to see yourself here in the field of research in both the cryptid and paranormal communities down the road?
Well, the number one thing, trustworthy. That's the first thing I'd like people to know. When I say these things, the stories that I've said, they sound quote unquote crazy to me. Okay, I collect things that people tell me, and I would not come out here and say these things if I didn't believe they were telling me the truth. So that's the first thing, trustworthy. And I would, for me, honestly, the biggest thing, it might be a selfish thing, but the reason I got into this was, curiosity. And then, of course, my history with my family, all those things. But honestly, what do I think of as beneficial in 10 to 15 years, something like that? It's pretty selfish. But if my daughter or my son are coming to me and saying, hey, Dad, I'm going to go to Garner State Park for a week, what do I need to take with me? I might go... Me? No. That's stuff that it did, and just if I can provide any kind of information from this area, there's just enlightening that goes on. I don't want people to think they're crazy with some of these things as well. I talked to you on some of the pre stuff that I really respect what you guys do. You, Vic, Josh, all you guys, because you're giving a voice to people that don't have one. I have a psych minor, and I've went through counseling myself with people and done different things. And I can tell you right now, the type of psychological issues that these people have from either seeing this or thinking it's outside their door all the time, you go to any professional with that, and they're going to treat you with a level of kid gloves, because they're not going to fully believe you on this. So there's still going to be that level of, okay, we'll treat this, but you're kind of nuts. You guys don't have that with them. You guys listen to them. You let them work through their problems. You let them work through what they're saying. And it helps. It's cathartic. They can't get that anywhere else, So that's kind of what I want to contribute to a little bit in my research. Just if somebody saw something, I'll put it this way, and it sounds cliche, but like that deer story. Somebody saw something, doesn't want to tell anybody, and sits there and freaks out about it because, PTSD, things like that, they can lead you to not sleep. They can lead you to not eat. They can lead you to detach from society, give people drug problems, drinking problems, different stuff. It's real stuff. And if I can just give a story that somebody else relates to and goes, okay, I don't feel crazy anymore. That's it. That's it right there. That's what I want from my research.
That's a good mark right there, and I think that's pretty fair as well. We talk about the whole idea of the missing 411. You mentioned David Paulides, and I forgot to even make mention to this about you, but one thing I wanted to ask you about the whole David Paulides thing is, how many reports do you feel are averaging between Dogman, Bigfoot, or any other cryptid reports out there? Do you feel that there's a half comparison, or do you feel that the majority of these reports are actually people who get lost in the woods and they go missing, they can't find each other, and they end up dying because of starvation and whatnot?
I do think there are aspects of that. I do think there are aspects of that. I do think there's, hey, it's you can get lost in the woods. All right. I mean, you can get lost in your car in an unfamiliar place. You know what I mean? So you get lost in the woods, and you're not a survivalist, or you're not adequately equipped to be out there. You can have some problems, man. You can have some big problems, and yeah, you could probably die. But I think some of these other cases where there's tracks to one area, or there's an area they covered, and then they just combed right through it, and then they find the person back in that area after they extensively searched through it, and I think it goes a little beyond just Bigfoot, Dogman, even UFO. I make a reference to Phil Schneider. He talked about deep underground military bases and some of his research with things. That's the stuff that scares the crap out of me, man. Some upright walking candidate that's just trying to make a living out there, eating food and trying to stay away from us. That doesn't freak me out that much. Going into the woods, coming up missing, whether it's a Dogman, a Bigfoot, or something else, that freaks me out, and I really don't know. They could be walking off, and it's very interesting when you go into some of these national parks and you see the regulations and guides they have. You're like, so if somebody came in here, put their campsite down, and just didn't check with you guys and left, you guys wouldn't go search or even wonder what was going on? No, they could have walked off the face of the earth. Oh, yeah, I guess, So, I don't even know if I answered your question on that. I think it associates with a lot of different things. I do think, given the tools that Dogman and Bigfoot have, given the speed, the strength, all those things, given one that's hungry, yeah, it's a possibility that could happen. But at the same time, if it was me and I was one of those populations of cryptids, I wouldn't be taking people that often. If you have a higher level of intelligence, if you're just out there looking for food, maybe. But I think we would have seen one or two a little more, or had a dead one somewhere if that's all they were looking for. I think there's a higher level of intelligence there. I think you can attribute it to certain things. We know that, we don't know, but everybody has postulated there's different types of Dogman, different types of Bigfoot, some that are more aggressive than others. Here in Texas, we have the Big Thicket area, and we have, that area, and there's reports of aggressive interactions with Bigfoot, Dogman, you name it up there, and there seems to be benign, reports in other places. So I think it all depends, but I do think that the federal government does have an idea maybe of what's going on, and they don't tell us, so.
Oh, 100%. I believe that. I think that there's a lot of smoke and mirrors that's being thrown around, the whole optic illusion idea that the public is being crazy, I guess, talking about this type of stuff. And my show suffered that type of interference from the Big Brother and the Big Blues, and I think that's probably one reason why the show is so good in a sense when it comes to what we talk about, because it attracts the attention to them, and it's worthy.
Well, with like your shows, like what I've seen on YouTube is, and I'm sure you've probably felt it on YouTube with certain things, is there's certain algorithms that are going on that are putting people's shows that used to be ranked in the top 10 of certain things down to 200, down to this or down to that. You know what I mean? I think that the federal government has looked at certain things. I think shows like yours, like Vic's, like, you know, Josh, all these guys that are getting to get information that maybe they're getting a little hesitant about now. You know, and the biggest thing that they want, and I say they all the time, but infighting, they love that. You know how much they would hate it if the cryptid community just mobilized and said, you know what, let's come to a consensus with certain things and let's agree instead of infighting all the time. You know, I think that would really help everybody out, you know, from that end. But there's so much just misinformation. There's so many things that go on you can never say. You know?
I agree with that, and I think that's kind of what the dividend comes down to in conclusion. One of the things I also find that's pretty fascinating when we talk about subjects like this is when there's always that interesting factor, and we may mention this before we started doing the show, was the idea of PTSD with people who see these things. I want to ask you something. When people have encounters with these creatures and people suffer from this PTSD, do you feel that the impact of these creatures are as far-fetched as what researchers are saying out there? Do you feel that it's the information, there's not enough information that's been resourceful in a sense that can prepare us for an encounter that would have us so traumatized?
I do. You got some really good questions, man. No, that's awesome, man. I do. You know, I do. I do think that there's a lot of different aspects of this, man. You know, and I think it's all bigger pieces of the same puzzle, like we've talked about before. You know, and it just goes in different directions. Honestly, you have really good questions, and I don't have specific answers. I'm sorry. Okay. I want to give one more story real quick, man. This is actually one that my brother reminded me of a little while ago because I was kind of prepping for your show here, just trying to polish up some information that I had. And one of the craziest things that happened to me personally, I never even really thought of as a supernatural or paranormal experience until we talked about it a little while ago. You mind if I go into that real quick? Well, I title it. This one's actually my brother and I jokingly call it this because it kind of freaked us out. We call it Poncho Man. Okay. Now you know what a poncho is. You know, like when you know, yeah. So I was. It was about 1-2 o'clock in the morning. My brother, he was in high school at the time. He was living with me and my wife, and it's like a high school kid. He wanted to go get some Taco Bell. You know, late at night. He was hungry. You know, he had practice the next day in the morning. I had to put some air in one of my tires, you know, before I went to work. So I was like, you know what, I might as well do that now. Screw it, I'll take him. I'm up. So I take him. Taco Bell's about 4 or 5 miles away from my house. I take the highway all the way to Taco Bell. You know, we're coming back. And on the way back, everything's fine, no problems. There's a corner store right next to the highway. Closes about 12? I'd say 11. Well, we're coming back, and it's about 1:30, somewhere around there, you know, 1:45. And I'm going to pull over and put air in my tire. So the tire that needs the air is on the passenger side, and I'm pulling up, and the air pump is on the driver's side. But as I pull up to the store, now you know how convenience stores are at night. You know, there's still light there, but it's not completely dark. There's nobody working, and this guy is not a worker. I'll tell you that right now. This guy is sitting there. You know, when you pull up to the convenience store, there's like a concrete stop. You know, like that backstop, not the one that's on the ground, but it's a little higher up. It's like an arch. Well, he was sitting on that. And he had his hands back against it. And he had a poncho that went from his wrists, it covered his whole upper body, and he had a hood on. And the hood came down, and I could not see his face. I just saw blackness. Okay? And the hood came down a little bit, And I'm thinking in my head, I mean, I've been an athlete my whole life. I work out to this day. I've had, I've done boxing, done a lot of different stuff. So, and this guy's not that big. So I'm just like, he looks like, no problem. He might be waiting for a ride, whatever. Most people wouldn't have stopped, but my dumbass, I'm like, hey, whatever. If he rushes me, I can take him, right? That's that dumb shit. So I go to put the air, and when I get out of the car, though, Chris, there's a different feeling I have. It's no more Mr. Confident. If he rushes me, I'll take him. It's if this guy starts running at me, and I don't know why I even told myself that. If this guy starts running at me, I'm getting right back in the car. You know what I mean? Like, and I've been in fights, before. I can handle myself, and this guy, like I said, doesn't look that big. My brother's in the passenger seat, so I'm not too worried about it. I don't see any weapons in his hands. So I go around, I'm pulling the air pump, and I'm looking down a little bit, but I'm looking at him because I don't want to put my back to him. So I start to put it to the tire. My brother goes, "He's coming." I was like, "What?" So I look back and I see the guy push off the arch, take a small step and a fast step, and come, and like he's coming at me. And the hood hasn't went up yet. I see no face. I don't see anything there, and no nose outline, no nothing. And this guy pushes off and like he's gonna sprint at me, and I had this feeling, man, like I was just terrified. I was very scared. And then it comes to me that exactly what I thought about was happening when I walked up. Like, I told myself, if this happens, I'm going to go. It's almost happening the exact same way I saw it in my head. So I get in the car and I book it, almost, and I even did like a little Dukes of Hazzard slide across the hood a little bit. It wasn't that graceful, but trying to get the heck out of there, and I got out, and the guy stops his run when we're driving away. And he doesn't like wave or, take his head down. The guy just starts staring in my direction. Like he's turning his upper body, but his lower body's still facing the direction he was running. He's just like looking, following me as I'm driving off and has his hands down and the hood never comes up. So I don't know what that was. I don't know. And what I mean by that, I don't know if the guy was trying, if he's a transient individual, a homeless guy trying to get some money, do something like that. But I live in this area and I see the people who are transient and homeless. You see them walking around. I've never seen this guy again, never seen the hood again, never anything like that. Kind of weird, right?
That is very weird, but it's also very fascinating too. I think when stories are submitted like that truly does set up the epitome of something very anonymous. But at the same time, it makes you wonder, Mark. Do you feel that you've always been blessed to have these type of occurrences? Because there are people out there who can study this stuff and they can never have an encounter with something mysterious. And for some out there who do believe in it and they do have these encounters, how do you feel to have these type of weird occurrences happen to you in your life so far?
I'll say this: they don't like right there. I can tell you that I had that fear, right? I had that fear like to get out of there, but it wasn't a PTSD type situation. It wasn't something that would linger with me, and that's how it is in most situations. And like I'll say stuff on here I really don't care about people knowing or hearing. I not premonitions, but you feel like you're empathic towards certain things sometimes. For example, with my profession, with what I do, being a stroke specialist, being, doing what I do, I always feel like I'm put in certain places for a reason, and I can always help. I can always help the patient. I've never been in a situation where I'm like, well, I don't know what to do here. And that's kind of the way I felt about those things. They happen. I don't freak out about them. I just kind of, mentally record them, write them down, whatever I need to do. And that's the question I've always had with that too. It's like there are people who go boots on the ground, get out there in the wilderness, never see anything. And then there's individuals who are like, yeah, I mean, Bigfoot ran across the road 3 times and I've seen it. And you're going, why has this happened to you more than anybody else? And I have a Native American, background with my family and things of that nature. I think the Native Americans are way more empathic than a lot of us want to believe or give them credit for. And, we just, think, oh, crazy, crazy Indian or crazy Native American, they have all those detailed stories, but we're not going to believe them. So that's kind of where I am with that.
Well, Mark, I will say this, I really like how you go into detail and how you are straight to the point and honest about a lot of what you talked about. And personally, that's why I was really ecstatic to have you on the show, because I really wanted to hear what you had to say. And really, you've done a fantastic job of covering up all the bullet points I've been curious about and I've questioned in reference to your reports and what your views are. And I would love to have you come back on the show again. I think you're a great guy to talk to, and I'd love to hear more of your feedback. But before we do go, Can you give us a little bit of advice, a little bit of something you would like to give to the audience, a little something you want to say to them in terms of research, if perhaps maybe newcomers in the field, enthusiasts, or people who are eyewitnesses? Any advice you'd like to give those people?
Well, I do, man, actually, and I'm not sitting here on a soapbox or preaching to anybody about things, but just be open-minded. That's the key that I can tell people. And it sounds cliche, and I really would like to give some pearls of advice to people and have this great quote, but at the same time, the real thing is be open-minded. You're out there looking for something. The fact that you're listening right now to me and Chris lets you know that you're interested, and that you're probably interested in something that somebody else would knock you down for. So just remember, don't knock other people down for their interests, no matter what they are. And if they're looking as intently as you are, look into it. Because if there's one instance in 100 that's true, that thing's real.
That's very true, and of course, Mark, I want to thank you again for coming on the show. I really am glad that you came on and talked about your views and encounters and so on. And I would love to hear you again. I'd love to have you come back on the show and do another show together. And with that being said, you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yes, sir. Definitely, Chris. Hey, thanks for having me on, brother. And yeah, I honestly, in the messengers, in the time that we've talked to each other in the past few years and stuff, I touched on about 40% of the stuff that I have. Those are just the ones that I personally had happen to me. I had more detail in my mind about, but when I went back and looked, it's like, yeah, I got some other stuff to talk about in these areas, from Black Panthers to, Bigfoot, man. So I would love to come on sometime. And honestly, hey, sorry about getting on a rant sometimes. Hey, I never get to talk to people who actually take me serious with this and actually, reciprocate the information. And it was awesome. I had a lot of fun, Chris.
Absolutely, I'm glad. And to many more encounters and many other things, my friend. You have a fantastic evening now.
You do the same, man. God bless.
That was a very good interview with Mark, and I really like Mark. I've actually spoken to Mark for quite some time now. Me and Mark, we've spoken to each other for almost 2 years now, and finally we're doing an interview together. And Mark's always been a very hindsight individual. I've always respected his research. He's sent me some things before, and there's a lot more things he's going to be sending me too down the line. I would like to collaborate with Mark once again, but I also want to collaborate with Josh Turner and have a nice Texas episode discussing South American folklore, because we're all of the same southern ethnicity in terms of our ancestry. So talk about South American mythology would be a great crossover horror episode. I think a lot of you would like that. So if you guys are into that kind of stuff, to talk something non-related to Dogman like that, I think you guys would enjoy it, especially if Josh was on board, because, Josh knows a lot about it. Of course, when I did an interview with him, Josh was always, and Sal were talking about the whole Book of Enoch and a whole bunch of other things in South American mythology. So I can't wait I would want to do something like that with all of them, especially. But I would also like to bring on Mark solo too, because he's a very interesting guy to talk to. I really like him. I've always praised what he said, so Mark's always been a good supporter as well. So I'd love to have Mark on the show as well, to come back and to discuss things. I know I kind of twisted my words around right there. But with that being said, guys, I'm going to conclude the show. A few things we're going to do before we conclude. As I always say, if you guys really like the show a whole lot and you guys want to go ahead and hit that like button, go right ahead. If you want to put your comments, your thoughts, feel free to leave a comment too. It's always great to hear your feedback, as well as if you are interested, we have a few links you guys can come check out. If you guys want to get in contact with me, I have an email. It's going to be in the description, venomousfringe@gmail.com. Feel free to send me a report. Feel free to send me an opinion, what you think, as well as also, too, if you would like to get in contact, whether to do a show or whatever, I'm always interested and I'm always down to do a show with anybody. I know those are some interesting words to use, but to be honest, I always love hearing your guys' feedback. I always love talking to people through email or whatever and interacting with subscribers and fans. So it's exciting to do, is basically what I'm saying. If you guys are so kind and any of the guys would like to help out and support the channel, we're not doing YouTube's partnership, because we basically tried to sign up for the monetization, but we got demonetized because of our content relation to cryptids and our survival, or at least our big use of support for the channel, whether is going to be our PayPal. If you would like to leave a donation, there's going to be a PayPal link. The donations are going towards equipment we're using in the field. I've made mention a few times about a drone I want to get. I want to use this drone to go out into the field. I want to film places that I can't get to, but the drone can capture footage of. For example, I can send this drone out somewhere in southern portion of my state, in the Pennsylvania region, where there's an array of Dogman encounters, and I can film the forest, and maybe if I get lucky, get into a cave. I'm not trying to get exaggerating here, but if you guys would like to support and keep the channel going, feel free to leave a PayPal donation in the description. If you guys want to join a Facebook group, we have a couple. We have the Venomous Fringe official Cryptid and Paranormal group. That group, you can contribute to anything or whatever you want to say in the group. There's only one question you got to answer before you enter in. That's basically if you've had a cryptid or paranormal encounter. If you've had both, perfect. Welcome aboard. If not, no problem. Come into the group. Feel free to interact with people. We want to make it a nice, humble, positive community, best as possible. As well as, folks, if you guys want to join a solo Dogman group, it's my main Dogman research group. Feel free to join it. We'd love to have you all in there and have you guys contribute and whatever you guys want to do, per se. But it's only Dogman related, so nothing Sasquatch, unless it's some sort of reference to both of them in the same encounter, or paranormal-wise too, unless it's the same thing. So folks, do not by any means just go forth with any other cryptid discussion. It's a solely Dogman group unless it has something to do with paranormal and Sasquatch or any other cryptid involved in such case. And always, folks, with that being said, thank you again for watching. Fringeaholics, as always, thank you. And also, too, for everybody new to the show, thank you for taking the time to listen in. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We will see you guys next week with 2 brand new episodes. I can't wait. And with that being said, have a great evening now.